So when I started this Witcher channel a little over a year ago, one video I was astonished had never been made was a thorough guide on builds for each Witcher armor. I think I understand why now. This video was way more of an undertaking than I expected, but here we are. I've put together optimized builds for each of the 7 Witcher sets: Cat, Griffin, Bear, Wolf, Viper, Manticore, and Forgotten Wolf, aka the Netflix gear. I'm not saying these are the only viable builds, definitely not, but each build I've put together plays to the strengths of the individual armor sets, and as someone who has more time in this game than I'm willing to admit publicly, I promise that you can't go wrong with any of these. That said, if you're not planning on watching the whole video, which I assume most people clicking on this wouldn't, and are planning to instead jump to whichever build sounds most appealing, because I have timestamps for you, I strongly recommend that you watch this first part of the video where I lay out some important information you're gonna need to know, as they affect each and every build. I did my absolute best to make this video useful for everyone, although this video would be a lot to take in if you've literally never touched the game before, but that said, I do ask that you just listen to the next minute before moving forward, so you're not wondering why I don't elaborate on certain things later. They're explained here, so I'm not repeating several different things 7 times in a row. First thing to note, there are a few skills that are going to show up again and again, and I want to explain why right now. The most important is Delusion, and the reason this will be in every setup is not related to combat. The skill does stop enemies from advancing towards you when using Axii, but the reason you'll see it in every build is because it unlocks a ton of dialogue options in-game. Without it, you'll probably be annoyed that you're frequently getting locked out of conversation paths. If that sounds like something that wouldn't bother you, then you can remove Delusion from any build, but I wouldn't recommend it. The second skill you're going to see in most of these setups is Synergy. This is a skill from the alchemy tree, and what it does is dramatically increase the stat bonuses you'll receive from mutagens. So in a sign build, that means a lot more sign intensity. In a sword build, that means significantly higher damage. So this skill fits incredibly well in setups that are otherwise alchemy free. Now that said, Synergy should not be an early game priority. It's a bit of an investment to get to, so keep that in mind when working towards the final builds I have for you today. Since I mentioned mutagens, I want to quickly explain what those are. They drop from monsters and can be placed in slots near your skill trees. To put it simply, if they match the color of the nearby equipped skills, the bonus received goes up dramatically. All we're worried about today are blue mutagens and red mutagens. Blue increases sign intensity, red increases damage. There's different levels, lesser, regular, and greater, and each stage increases the bonus received. I'll be showing greater mutagens throughout this video, but keep in mind that the main way you upgrade from one stage to the next is by collecting the lesser versions, which you'll find in combat. 3 lesser equals 1 regular, 3 regular equals 1 greater. I also need to mention that for each build, I'll be giving you a Runewright recommendation. The Runewright is a special merchant from Hearts of Stone who offers unique sword and armor upgrades. These upgrades take up all of your rune or glyph slots, so you can't have anything else in your armor's chest piece or your swords, but often those upgrades are worth the trade-off. If you're new to the game, he's extremely expensive and the quest to unlock his services are well over level 30, so don't worry about him early, but he can be found here on your map. Also, I want to make a couple of disclaimers about the Blood and Wine mutations and Grandmaster armor. Mutations are special late game abilities. If you're not to the Blood and Wine DLC yet, don't worry about them, but I will be making recommendations. I should also say that those upgrades will eventually unlock additional ability slots, up to 4, but they're usually limited to specific types of upgrades and don't have any mutagen bonus. I will be making some recommendations for those bonus spots, but keep in mind that by that point the essentials of the build are usually taken care of, and you're probably not even going to unlock 2 or maybe even 3 of those extra slots until New Game Plus. For Grandmaster armor, which I mentioned a minute ago, most of you know this, but the final upgrades to armor sets come with a bonus ability for using half the set, and then another if you use everything, so all armor and both swords. Those bonuses are included in this video, but just know that they won't apply until you've upgraded your armor. Also, this part really needs to be hammered home, Grandmaster bonuses do apply to all upgrade levels in New Game Plus. That was a change introduced with the next gen update that I think a lot of people aren't yet aware of. Finally, also in the Blood and Wine DLC, there's a silver sword called Erendite that can be acquired during a quest called There Can Be Only One. It's very good. Every hit on an enemy increases its damage by 10% up to a maximum of 100 before it deals a very powerful strike, and its damage is increased by a small amount permanently. If I recommend it for a build, just keep in mind that if you're at a lower level and nowhere near the DLC, you can just stick with whichever silver sword is part of the set I'm going over. That said, if you're halfway through a playthrough and find a sword you think is cool and want to use, go for it. It's a game, have fun. There's only a couple of cases in this video where using a specific sword is super important, and I'll make those situations very clear. It's also worth pointing out that almost all of the gameplay in this guide will have enemy upscaling on, and what that means is all opponents will be scaled up to my level, so nothing is going to go down super easy. It's a more consistent way to show how effective these builds are than with it off. Also, if this video helps you out, I'd ask for you to leave a like, as YouTube is so obsessed with engagement for whether it pushes videos, and I'd hate to see this one fall into obscurity because it was quite the project. Okay, before we get into the builds, I do want to thank today's sponsor, HelloFresh. And if you've ever considered trying a meal delivery service, you need to stick around for the next minute, as they've sent me an exclusive offer for my viewers that is nothing short of an incredible deal. And I don't say that lightly, especially in a time when food is really expensive. That said, there are 3 main things I consider myself a huge fan of: great stories, great music, and great food. I can seek out great stories and music easily enough, but food is another story. Quality meals are often both expensive and time-consuming, not exactly an appealing combo, but HelloFresh takes out the hassle and makes eating well affordable. Each week you choose from dozens of high-quality meals, and the fresh, pre-portioned ingredients are then delivered right to your door with handy little recipe cards that'll have you eating a high-quality meal in minutes. And the discount HelloFresh has on offer when using my code is just too good to pass up if you've ever considered giving their meals a try. If you use my link in the description or go to hellofresh.com and use code POGNKFEB65, you'll get 65% off the entirety of your first box and free shipping. You can customize how many meals you want for different numbers of people, but just as an example, when using my code, you can get a weekly box for 2 people with 6 meals for just over $20 shipped. That's significantly less than $5 a serving, and there's no lock-in. So if you've wanted to try HelloFresh and see what it's like, now is the perfect time. Each order also helps out the channel, which is nice as well. Anyway, thanks to HelloFresh for sponsoring, and let's get into those builds. So first up, let's talk about the feline gear, or cat armor. This set is all about critical hits and general sword damage, and other than delusion for the speech checks, and cat school techniques for the huge crit and attack bonuses, all of your early game points should be invested in the red combat tree. You'll need muscle memory for the flat fast attack damage increase, precise blows for the increased crit chance and crit damage, and you'll also want to be investing in adrenaline, this meter right here that builds during combat and does a few things, but most importantly increases your damage. Razor Focus gives you a free point every time combat begins, and also increases how quick the meter fills from there. Undying saves you from death as long as you have at least 1 point available, and Resolve stops you from losing adrenaline when taking damage, which you otherwise would. Finally, you'll want the Whirl skill, which unlocks a special fast attack where you swirl around and slice and dice everything in sight. That's all you're going to want for red skills, but those should be your early game focus. Now we want to start investing in alchemy with an end goal of further increasing our damage. Metabolic control is huge. It increases your toxicity by 30 points, allowing you to consume more decoctions and potions. This is only a 1-point skill in the general tier, so if you want, you could equip this one really early on. The alchemy tree itself though, I'd recommend holding off even starting in with these skills until you first upgraded everything else we've talked about so far. The 3 most important alchemy tree skills for this build are Acquired Tolerance, Hunter Instinct, and Killing Spree. Acquired Tolerance increases your toxicity for every alchemy recipe you've discovered, so make sure you're exploring and coming across these. This skill just gets better and better the more you've explored. Hunter Instinct increases your critical hit damage by 100% when adrenaline is maxed out, which is very easy to do with this build. And finally, Killing Spree increases your crit chance by 30% for every enemy you kill in a combat encounter. So if you're fighting more than a couple of enemies, you'll be getting consistent critical hits in no time. Before moving on to mutations and the bonus skills you can equip, let's move over to our equipment. Up until you reach Blood and Wine, feel free to just use the cat swords for the upgrade level of your armor. Once you get to the Blood and Wine DLC and can use Erendite, definitely use that instead. It sacrifices the 6-piece Grandmaster Cat bonus, but believe me, it's worth it. With this build, you're going to want to go to the Rune Rite and equip Severance on both of your swords. What Severance does is drastically increase the range of the Whirl attack, which makes it far more effective and an absolutely ridiculous tool for crowd control. For your armor, I would enchant it with Protection, which gives you a free Quen shield whenever you enter combat. You can also go with Deflection, which deflects arrows from human enemies, but that will do nothing for you against monsters. For the glyphs installed in your boots, pants, and gloves, there's nothing that affects sword damage or crit chance, so I would just stack up on some Quen intensity glyphs. This will allow your free shield to tank a few more hits, and there really isn't a better option. Okay, back to the skill page and the mutation. This is going to be a Euphoria final build, which is the mutation that increases your sword damage and sign intensity, but most importantly your sword damage, based on your toxicity. Because we have acquired tolerance and metabolic control equipped, our toxicity is already fairly high. The exact number will depend on how many alchemy recipes you've discovered, but by the time you're getting to Blood and Wine, if you've been clearing out points of interest on your map, it should be up there. Now, with this build, you still have a lot of excellent skill options you can use, which makes the bonus spots that open up as you research more and more mutations pretty valuable. With some of the builds that come later, because of the way they're structured, these skills matter less, but here you can continue to dramatically improve this build even into New Game Plus. First, I'm going to recommend Synergy to further increase your mutagen bonuses, and second, you're going to want to invest in fast metabolism. This skill makes your potion toxicity drop significantly faster, which frees you up to drink more and more. After that, I like Refreshment, which heals 30% of your total health every time you pop a potion. And finally, I like to use Protective Coating, which gives you damage resistance to whichever enemy type matches the blade oil you have equipped. The one weakness of this set is that you're still pretty susceptible to damage. Cat Armor has the lowest protection of any Witcher gear, but the nice thing about this build is getting your health back is incredibly easy. The reason it's so easy beyond the skills I just mentioned is because of the decoctions you'll be running. If you don't know, decoctions are more or less long-lasting potions, 30 plus minutes at a time. The other difference between decoctions and potions is that the toxicity from decoctions doesn't ever go down until the effect wears off, unlike potions where your toxicity will start ticking down immediately. So with this build at its max potential, you can have 3 decoctions active at a time with a fair amount of room for potions on top. Or you could even have 4 decoctions but no room for potions, but you don't really want that. However, you're probably going to have a little less toxicity than I do in my build you're seeing on screen, as you need to have every single alchemy recipe discovered, which you might not. You may put this build together a little earlier and only have room for 2 decoctions plus potions. That said, the most important decoction you're going to need to have active is the Troll. What it does is give you constant health regeneration in and out of combat, and the reason this is so important has to do with overdose damage. Usually, if you drink too many potions, they'll start damaging you. But with Troll Decoction active, your toxicity meter can be pushed to its limits with no drawbacks. After Troll, you're free to do whatever you want with decoctions, but here are some quality options. Ekamara should be a priority. What it does is provide healing whenever you damage enemies, pretty straightforward. With a build like this one, Catacan is also nice, as it gives you a flat crit chance increase. Those are the 3 I like to use. Most of you likely won't be at a point in your game where you'll have space for 3 and potions, so Troll should be priority number 1, Ekamara is very strong, and Catacan just plays super well with critical hits. For potions, once you have fast metabolism, you can just spam whatever you want to your heart's desire. You'll be able to have 5+ potions active at once if you want, plus your decoctions. Before that point though, I like to prioritize Thunderbolt for the damage boost, and Maribor Forest is nice for adrenaline gain, plus a free point upon consumption. If you're early into the build and don't have Troll and Ekamara yet, you'll need to use Swallow and White Raffords for healing, but once you have those decoctions active at all times, healing potions become very low priority. Okay, let's move on to my Griffin sign build, which is arguably my favorite way to play. I'd like to immediately make clear that this is not going to be a balanced sword and sign build. You can do that with Griffin gear, but this is a setup for those of you who want to commit to Witcher signs and push them to their absolute limit. The first ability point you're going to want to spend once you have the gear is on Griffin School Techniques. It's one of the general skills and will dramatically increase your sign intensity and stamina with medium armor, which Griffin is. Other than that though, with this build we're putting all of our points into signs for quite a while, because we want to maximize our sign intensity and stamina regen, and every sign perk equipped helps us increase both of those stats in addition to their main ability. In some cases, the actual effect of the skill is almost secondary to wanting our slots filled up with sign upgrades so we can increase our intensity. So, because we're so focused on upgrading our sign intensity and stamina, if I don't have a sign skill equipped here, it's for one of 2 reasons. A, it's completely useless or nearly so, or B, it directly conflicts with a later element of this setup. So my final skills, not including mutagen slots, are these. For Ard, I have everything equipped. Far-reaching Ard increases your range, Ard Sweep gives you a 360 effect if you hold down the cast instead of just pressing it, Ard Intensity increases your Ard Intensity, believe it or not, and Shockwave, which is the most vital of these skills, gives the sign a massive upgrade by allowing it to remove a flat percentage of enemy health. That percentage gets higher and higher with your sign intensity. If you're in the early to middle stages of working towards this setup, the only thing to keep in mind with the Ard skills is that Ard Intensity, the skill, is useless until Shockwave is equipped. The reason for that is without Shockwave, all Art Intensity does is increase your chance of staggers and knockdowns, but with this build, our Intensity will already be to a point where we can stagger or knock down just about anything. However, once you've equipped Shockwave, like I said, the damage from that skill increases with your Intensity, so the Art Intensity perk then becomes vital. I apologize for how many times I just said Intensity, that will continue throughout this build. Moving on to Igni, the only skill you'll want is Igni Intensity. Everything else here will either do nothing, close to nothing, or directly conflicts with what is coming. For Yrden, you're going to want 2 of the 4 skills. Sustained Glyphs increases trap duration, and Supercharged Glyphs is beyond essential. This skill was massively buffed with the next-gen update, and with this build it has absolutely ridiculous damage potential and also synergizes incredibly well with where this final build is going. For Quen, again, 2 of the 4 upgrades. Exploding Shield sends enemies flying and deals damage when the sign breaks, and Quen Discharge sends some of the damage the shield absorbs right back to the opponent. For Axii, all you're gonna need is Delusion for the speech checks. That's 10 sign skills in total plus Griffin School techniques, which leaves us with 1 open spot. In my final build, I like to again fit in Synergy from the Alchemy tree, which we've talked about before. This is going to dramatically increase your sign intensity bonus from your mutagen slots, but it should be stressed that getting to Synergy is a commitment, and you shouldn't worry about this perk until you're at least done with the base game. Early on, just focus on your sign skills, and equally important, focus on getting those blue mutagens upgraded. So let's quickly talk about the Runewrite and mutations. You're going to want to enchant your armor with Rotation, which gives Igni a 360-degree area of effect. This was buffed with the next-gen update and is now incredible when fighting more than one enemy. The glyph slots on the boots, pants, and gloves should be filled up with either Igni or Ard glyphs. I'd recommend Igni. Our Quen intensity is high enough, same with Axii and Yrden. For the rune openings on your sword, the Vela's runestones are the way to go, as they give you a flat sign intensity increase. For your swords in general, just stick with the Griffin swords as they give you the best stat boost for what this build is all about. And more importantly, you need to be using them for the Griffin set bonuses. At 3 pieces, you can double cast your signs, so 2 right in a row, which is obviously beyond useful for this build. And at 6 pieces, casting Yrden and standing in it increases your sign intensity by 100%, and also reduces the damage you take and upgrades your stamina. The Yrden ring itself also has its size increased. The final step of this build is to unlock the Blood and Wine mutation Conductors of Magic. What it does is add 50% of your sword damage to every sign cast, as long as you have your sword drawn. And at this point, once you have that mutation, your signs are going to be beyond ridiculous. Quen, Yrden, Ard, and Igni are all capable of rapidly killing any enemy you want to, and your swords kind of become secondary. That's the point of this build. If you want something more balanced, look elsewhere in this video. For the extra perk slots you get from mutagens, Conductors of Magic lets you slot in either combat or sign skills, so red or blue. Because we're almost exclusively using signs with this build, especially once we're this deep into a setup, you really can do whatever you want here. Yrden Intensity is worth using, but for various reasons that's about all that's left in the sign tree. A lot of the alternate signs conflict with what this build is centered around, and Quen Intensity isn't going to do much of anything when it's already so high. Because of that, you may as well invest a bit in Adrenaline points. Razor Focus will give you a free point, and you can pair that with Undying, which saves you from death as long as you have a point. It's a nice failsafe, and you should also throw in Resolve, which will ensure you don't lose your point from taking damage. Oh, also, you're going to have relatively low toxicity with this build. So for potions, all you really need to worry about is healing. Swallow and White Raffer's Decoction will be more than enough. You can also equip Petrie's Filter for a little extra sign intensity, but you may want to keep your toxicity available just for health. You're going to have Quen available basically all the time, but things do happen even though the Griffin armor's protection is more than adequate. So, for the Bear Witcher set, I decided to do something a little different, and this is a build that has become one of my all-time favorites. Now, I do want to point out, yes, you can do another Euphoria build with the Bear armor. I already did Cat Euphoria in this video, and will also be doing Manticore Euphoria later, and it's also a solid option with Bear. Of the 3 though, I will say that Bear Euphoria is my least favorite in terms of actually having fun, just my opinion, so I wanted to put something together comparable in terms of power potential, but with significantly more gameplay variety. I should say this build is one you do have to work quite hard towards, and it needs the Blood and Wine mutation to bring it all together. With every other build in this video, I tried to write each of them in a way where you can follow along from almost any starting point. This build though does absolutely require the mutation to make sense, so I wouldn't go down this path if you're just starting out and want to use the bear gear. So with that out of the way, we are putting tons and tons of points into the combat tree. Some of these might seem nonsensical without knowing what equipment we're going to use later, so just bear with me until you see the end result. So first we have the fast attack skills, muscle memory for the damage, and precise blows for the critical hits. Same goes for the strong attacks. We're going to want both crushing blows and strength training. Rend is also essential. We're also putting points into adrenaline, resolve to ensure we don't lose it when we take damage, and razor focus for a free point in combat and quicker generation of points in general. I also have crippling strikes, the skill that guarantees that fast attacks cause enemies to bleed. Finally, you absolutely need to have a whirl equipped. In addition to those 9 combat tree perks, I also have Delusion for the dialogue options, Synergy for another 60% attack power from our mutagen bonuses, and Cat School Techniques for the huge critical hit and fast attack bonuses. Right now you're either thinking I've gone completely off the rails, or you know exactly where I'm going with this. Now, with most of these setups, I explain my bonus mutagen spots near the end, but with this one, I should talk about them now because I have some really important skills there. The thing to keep in mind is that by the time you have the mutation we're using for this build, you're going to have 2 bonus spots open, and again, this build needs the mutation, so if you're doing this, you will have the extra space, and these perks should just be considered part of the main build. The first essential alchemy skill is Acquired Tolerance, which increases your toxicity, aka how many potions you can drink, for every alchemy recipe you've discovered. If you've been clearing out points of interest, by the time you're in Blood and Wine, this skill by itself should be giving you enough toxicity for what this build is trying to accomplish. Next, you'll want to use Protective Coating, which increases your damage resistance against whatever enemy type your currently equipped Blade Oil matches. Because Bear is by far the armor with the best resistances, combining it with Protective Coating makes you an absolute tank before we even consider anything else. In my last 2 spots, which are an extension of this build but not at all required, I have Hunter Instinct and Killing Spree. The first increases your critical hit damage with full adrenaline, while the second increases your crit chance for every enemy you kill in a single fight. These just bolster your already very high crit stats, and are worth the investment once those spots open up. So let's move over to my equipment and eventually the mutation, as I have some explaining to do. Maybe the most important thing you're going to want to prioritize is enchanting your bear armor with levity using the rune rite. Now your heavy bear armor is treated as light armor. You'll have rapid stamina regen with all of the same protection stats, and equally important is you'll now be able to benefit from the Cat School Techniques perk we equipped earlier. You'll also want to enchant both of your swords with Severance, which dramatically increases the range of both Whirl and Rend. Severance is essential for this build, so be sure to make it a top priority. For the extra glyph openings on your gloves, pants, and boots, your 2 best options are either going to be Quen glyphs, as that's the only sign this build will regularly use, or reinforcement glyphs, which just makes your equipment wear down far slower. If you don't mind repairing your equipment frequently, just go with Quen, as there's no home run option for those extra spots. Now, I again want to acknowledge that this build without the mutation is dumb. It doesn't make much sense and is poorly optimized. Throw the mutation in there with a bit of clever manipulation, and all of a sudden this build becomes absolutely busted and extremely fun with a lot of variety, which is a rare combo. The mutation in question is Metamorphosis, and what it does is give you a free random decoction every time you apply a critical effect to an enemy. Critical effects are burn, freeze, poison, that sort of thing, and even mind controlling with Axii is a critical effect. These free decoctions cost you no toxicity and last for 4 minutes. Now you might be thinking that sounds terrible. There are so many decoctions, tons of them are useless, and getting them at random offers no reliable benefits. Well, that is true, but this mutation can be manipulated a bit. All you need to do is go into your inventory and pick out your 5 favorite decoctions. After that, just drop the rest of them. Why? Well, even though it doesn't say so, Metamorphosis only pulls from the decoctions in your inventory, so you can get it to give you exactly what you want every single fight. That means you can have your 5 favorite decoctions at absolutely no toxicity cost, and you'll also be able to drink whichever potions you feel like drinking. On top of that, applying critical effects to enemies is extremely easy and sort of strangely defined. If you play it right, you can have all 5 decoctions active before you've even swung your sword. The easiest way I've found to activate them is to simply throw a dancing star or firebomb. Each tick of fire will count as a separate application of a critical effect, so within a few seconds of throwing it, you'll be fully decoctioned out. Northern Wind also works, as does Devil's Puffball and even the regular Grape Shot Bomb, although Dancing Star is the quickest. On top of that, if you find yourself out of bombs or are just not wanting to stop and throw one, you can quickly get your decoctions back with fast attacks, as they have guaranteed bleed from the Crippling Strikes perk we equipped. What's even more, and I'm kind of bearing the lead here a little, is that I've also found that simply parrying works to get a decoction back. For some enemies, you'll have limited or no parrying options, but against many enemy types it works incredibly well for getting a decoction or two replenished, and parrying is something you'll likely be doing anyway. So as far as which decoctions you're going to want to use, you can play around with several, but here is my favorite setup. First, I have Water Hag. What this does is give you an absolutely massive 50% damage increase whenever your health is maxed out, and with this build, keeping yourself fully healthy should be easy. I also have Catacan, which is going to give you a flat crit chance increase at all times, which speaks for itself. Then I have the Echidna decoction, which is absolutely essential for this build. What it does is heal you whenever you do anything that uses stamina, so if you use Whirl, you heal yourself. If you use Rend, you heal yourself. I also have Ekamara decoction, which heals you whenever you deal damage to enemies. Between those two, keeping your health maxed out is extremely easy, and you'll almost always be benefiting from the Water Hag decoction. Your 5th decoction is really up to you, and the fact that I'm even saying 5th decoction is insane, but if you really want to triple down on keeping your health maxed out, just go with Troll decoction. That'll give you constant moderate health regen, and will also offset any overdose damage you might take if you drink too many regular potions. Usually too many potions would start ticking down your health immediately, but Troll decoction heals you faster than overdosing damages you. That said, if you want to not worry about overdosing at all and instead swap Troll decoction out for something else, one skill you could consider speccing into your build is Heightened Tolerance. This brings your overdose threshold all the way up to 80%, at which point you should never be overdosing with this build. What I'm about to say may sound insane for a bear build, but if I was going to spec in Heightened Tolerance, I'd probably take out Protective Coating. This build just gives you so much healing and damage resistance already that I have found Protective Coating has very little effect on how quickly I can get my health back up to 100% for the Water Hag decoction damage boost. Don't get me wrong, Protective Coating still mitigates a lot of damage, but the decoctions we have active are so effective at healing that getting back to full health is not much of an issue. It's up to you. I still think Protective Coating and Troll decoction is the better combo, but if you want more freedom with your decoctions, Heightened Tolerance should also be a consideration. I should also throw it out there that in my endgame build you're seeing on screen, I do have enough toxicity to drink a decoction to have active full time and still have a ton of room for potions. So I could leave 6 in my inventory, drink 1 the normal way, or even 2 if I didn't care about having as much potion freedom, and then get the rest from critical effects. However, in this save, I literally have every alchemy formula discovered, so Acquired Tolerance is doing a lot of heavy lifting. But most of you will likely be missing at least a handful of formulas, so your toxicity will be a bit lower than what you're seeing on screen. For potions, the most important 3 are Tawny Owl, Thunderbolt, and Maribor Forest. Tawny Owl significantly increases your stamina regen, so you'll be able to whirl and rend constantly. Thunderbolt gives you a flat damage increase, which speaks for itself, and Maribor Forest gives you a free adrenaline point and increases adrenaline gain. That means you'll immediately have 2 adrenaline points whenever any combat scenario begins, and it'll take very little time to max out your meter and fully benefit from the damage boost adrenaline gives you, plus the extra damage increase you'll be getting from the Hunter Instinct perk. The potion Blizzard is also fun for slowing down time, but is not necessary. What I really like about having heavily invested in heal decoctions is that you no longer have to worry about healing potions like Swallow and White Rafford's decoction, which is actually a potion. I know that's confusing. Anyway, Swallow and White Rafford's are completely unnecessary in this build, so you can just focus on potions that boost your combat stats. For signs, really all you need to be using is Quen. The Grandmaster Bear Gear gives you a nice little Quen upgrade as long as you're using 3 pieces. If one shield breaks, you have a chance of getting another for free, which is nice. For swords, I just rock the Bear Steel and Erendite. The 6-piece bear set bonus is not good enough to justify using anything other than Erendite, but keep in mind that until you get it, the Bear Silver Sword is a great option as well. I just need to stress that this build is absolutely ridiculous. I think the gameplay should be speaking for itself. It's amazing at everything other than your signs needing to be limited to Quen, as your stamina should be reserved for Rend and Whirl. Once you're fully benefiting from everything this set has to offer, you have the potential to one-shot almost anything in the game with Rend, and Whirl is so fun and effective for crowds that it's more than worthy of its inclusion here. Okay, let's move on to our Wolven setup. There are a lot of equally solid options with this set, but I'm going to give you my favorite of the best setups. The Wolf gear is meant for well-rounded builds, so not setups where you're pushing one mechanic to an unreasonable level. What it is great for are builds that are nicely balanced and really push you towards engaging with several tools in your arsenal, and the build I have for you today is centered around swords, signs, and the bleed mechanic. I do have synergy in this build and also Griffin school techniques for those huge medium armor boosts, but other than that, it's all sign and combat skills. The combat tree is very straightforward. I first have the 2 fast attack skills, muscle memory for damage, precise blows for critical hits. I also have a heavy focus on adrenaline points. Razor Focus gives you a free one whenever combat begins and also increases point generation. Resolve makes it so you don't lose any adrenaline when taking damage, which you otherwise would, and I also like to throw Undying into this build. What it does is save you from death and restore some of your health as long as you have an adrenaline point available, which you always should with this build. Just as a quick reminder, adrenaline increases your sword damage and builds up during combat. Finally, this is the most important skill here, you need Crippling Strikes. This skill gives you a 100% chance of causing bleed to enemies with fast attacks, which means you don't have to invest much of anything else in bleed to enjoy all the benefits we'll be discussing in a minute. Now, for the sign tree, we of course have Delusion again, and then we've invested into Igni and Quen. First we have Igni Intensity, and then we have Firestream, which is the alternate Igni mode. You can still use regular Igni by tapping, but holding down your cast will activate the alternate version. We'll talk about how this plays into the build in a minute. Finally, within our standard 12 spots, we have Exploding Shield, which causes Quen to knock back and damage enemies that break through the sign. Now, before we talk about mutations, let's move over to equipment. We're going to use both Wolven swords, as if you're going to go with a bleed build, you kind of have to, as both are required for the Grandmaster 6-piece set bonus. Both Wolven bonuses are bleed related. One increases your sword damage for every bleeding enemy, which can add up fairly fast because with Crippling Strikes your bleed chance is maxed out with fast attacks, and the other bonus increases the amount of bleed you can apply to a single enemy dependent on your adrenaline, which synergizes well with our previous upgrades. If you have a full adrenaline meter, that means 3 fast attacks will cause an enemy to bleed 3 times at once, so 3 times faster. For the runes on your sword, I'm going to recommend going to the Rune Rite and applying Preservation to one of your blades. What this does is make the boost you get from grindstones and armorer's tables permanent. This means that the 20% stat increase never wears off, and you only need it on one sword to apply to both and your armor. You can put it on either sword, it really doesn't matter, and the other we're going to fill up with good old Vela's runestones for increases to sign intensity. By the way, if you find yourself in a situation where you don't have enough skill points for the Crippling Strikes perk yet, the one that gives fast attacks guaranteed bleed, then instead fill up your sword with Divana runestones, which increase your bleed chance. Anyway, we're also going to enchant our armor with Protection, which gives a free Quen shield at the beginning of each fight. This is extremely useful, especially in a build like this when we're using Firestream, which can leave you a little vulnerable. The glyph spots on our boots, pants, and gloves are all going to be filled up with Igni glyphs to upgrade that sign even further. Finally, for our mutation, I'm again going with Conductors of Magic. This was also in the Griffin build, but essentially what it does is increase your sign damage by whatever 50% of your sword damage is. So if your sword deals 600 damage, every sign cast gets a 300 damage increase, and that benefit applies to Firestream. What that means is Igni will absolutely melt even the highest health enemies, and also when your Quen shield breaks, it'll deal massive damage to anything nearby. What I love about this build is how flexible it is. Against large defensive enemies, you can get a few swings in to get that bleed going, and the second they protect themselves, you can start melting them down with Igni to get them burning so you have more chances to apply bleed. Also, because we've invested in Quen, it'll have your back when vulnerable with Firestream. Against groups, I mean, this set speaks for itself. Your sword damage is high enough to take care of any grunts with ease, and if fighting a group of higher level opponents, bleed and burn both have the ultimate potential to melt away the health of enemies you aren't even focused on. Anyway, let's talk about our extra mutation spots, and you can use both sword and sign builds with the mutation we've chosen for this build. For me, I decided to upgrade Quen a bit more with extra intensity and also Quen Discharge, which kicks back some of the absorb damage onto the attacker. And I also threw in Deadly Precision, which is just a personal preference. What that does is give you a chance of insta-killing enemies, and that chance increases with your adrenaline. I just find that skill fun, it adds an X factor you can't really control, and is always pretty satisfying. For potions, again, our toxicity is fairly low, and I like to keep it simple most of the time by focusing on healing with Swallow and White Raffords, but you can also throw Thunderbolt in there for extra damage, or Petrie's Filter for a sign intensity boost. I just want to say I'm so happy with how this build turned out. If you're looking for something fun and pretty varied, then this is an excellent path to take. So next up we have the Viper gear, and this one was a real headache to even include. The reason I say that is because the Viper gear doesn't work like every other set. This armor doesn't really have any specific stat bonus to build around, and it's also only available at a single upgrade level. You buy the schematics during the Hearts of Stone DLC, but there's no upgrading it from there. When I say it doesn't have any stat bonuses to build around, I just mean that none of the individual armor pieces greatly enhance specific non-resistant stats like every other set. The armor does offer very solid protection, but that's it, whereas every other Witcher armor also has multiple and major damage alchemy or sign-based upgrades you're meant to play into. The only very small exception is that the Viper gear does make you immune to poisoning, which is a nice little perk when poison occasionally comes up in gameplay, but it's absolutely not something you build around like upgrades to attack power, stamina, or sign intensity. The Viper set also doesn't have the huge Grandmaster set bonuses for wearing 3 or 6 pieces, which every other set benefits from once fully upgraded and in New Game Plus. The Viper set doesn't even have a Grandmaster tier to begin with, it's just the 1 tier and that's that. For those reasons, I want to be upfront and say that if you're set on using the Viper armor because you love the look, you can kinda feel free to do just about anything. There is no template, as essentially all the armor does is give you good damage resistances, and that's why I'm going to give you 2 options for this set just for the sake of not copping out here. The Viper swords themselves do have some extremely specific bonuses to build around if you really want to, and while those don't make for the statistically best build, it can be fun and at least you're building into what the swords do, so I am going to give you a setup centered around those. Alternatively, if you're sure you want to commit to the Viper gear, but do want the statistically best possible build, what you're going to want to do is use almost exactly the same setup as the Euphoria Cat School build I did earlier in this video, and I'm going to refer you back to that section. The only thing to change is you'll need to sacrifice the Protection enchantment, which gives you a free Quen shield, for the Levity enchantment, which turns your medium Viper armor into light armor. That will allow you to benefit from the Cat School Techniques perk that's in the Euphoria build you'll be doing. The Cat armor can benefit from it by default because it's already light, whereas the Viper set needs the Levity enchantment, so you have to sacrifice the Protection glyph word. You can also drop the Alchemy skill Refreshment if you want to swap it out for Poisoned Blades, which gives your oils a chance of poisoning enemies. The reason you might want to do that is because the Venomous Viper School swords give you a poisoning chance, and if you want to play into it with Poisoned Blades, go for it. The Viper version of the Cat Euphoria build is basically trading off damage for protection. The Viper gear has significantly higher resistances, while the Cat armor comes equipped with huge boosts to attack power that the Viper set just doesn't have. Now, I said I was going to give you a second option for the Viper gear, and the reason for that is because the Viper Venomous swords, as mentioned, do have some boosts you can invest into. The swords themselves are excellent, they really are, so I'm going to give you a second build strictly centered around what the swords already do. They boost Ard, critical hits, and poison chance, so here's a fun build centered around Ard, sword damage, and poison. The Euphoria setup we already talked about is better, it just is, but if you love the Viper gear and want to play into it while using all 6 pieces, here you go. I'm gonna run through this one quicker than the others because really, if you're just dead set on using the Viper gear but want the best build, you're just gonna want to do Euphoria, but this is something fun. So you're gonna want to invest in the 2 primary fast attack skills, Muscle Memory for the increased damage, and Precise Blows for the crit bonuses. You're also going to want to take Crippling Strikes for the guaranteed bleed, which I'll explain in just a minute. You also need to invest in Razor Focus for a free adrenaline point when entering combat, and Resolve to ensure you don't lose any adrenaline when taking damage. You'll also need to throw in Griffin School Techniques from the general tree for increased sign intensity and stamina. From the alchemy tree, we are taking Protective Coating for the extra damage resistance when using oils, and Poisoned Blades, which increases our poison chance when using oils. Finally, I have Synergy again for those boosts to our mutagen bonuses. In the sign tree, I of course have Delusion for the speech checks, and then I fully invested in Ard. All 4 skills maxed out. In my final 2 bonus spots from the mutation, I've just invested a bit in Exploding Shield and Quen Intensity, as we're going to be taking the glyph word Protection. I just talked about this, but what that does is give you a free Quen shield whenever entering combat, which is such a nice little quality of life feature that I fit it in wherever I can. There is an Ard-based glyph word, but because we're going to be using a certain mutation, it really isn't worth it. Before we get to the mutation though, let's talk about our sword runes. Very simple, we're playing into poison, so fill those swords up with the Marana runestones. Each one increases your poison chance by 5%, and between those, the sword's built-in benefits, and the poison blade skill, your attacks will very consistently be poisoning everything not immune. The crippling strike skill was included in this build because it guarantees bleed with fast attacks, and what that means is most of your sword swings will be auto-applying both statuses at once. You'll also want to fill up the extra glyph openings on your gloves, boots, and pants with Ard intensity glyphs for obvious reasons. Finally, the mutation we're using is kind of a given. We're going with Piercing Cold. What it does is give Ard a chance to freeze enemies based on your adrenaline, and any enemies that aren't frozen will be dealt massive damage. In addition, any enemies that you freeze and knock down at the same time will die instantly. This build is very strong, but it is a setup centered around very specific mechanics. The distraction you might run into with the Viper armor is that anything you can do with this set can be done better with another set of Witcher gear. The bonuses they come with that the Viper School lacks just stands out with any setup you put together. Just in terms of stats, that's the case, but if you love the look of the Viper armor, it's very flexible and you'll be just fine. It's not a bad set, it's very good, it's just not one to use if you're looking to push your stats to the max. So let's move on to the Forgotten Wolf set, or the Netflix armor. Thankfully, this is a pretty straightforward build, as the reason to use this set more or less comes down to the 6-piece set bonus. What it does is greatly increase your Ard damage when casting the sign on enemies affected by Yrden. By itself, this set bonus makes Ard very powerful, but once you've invested in that combo, it becomes kind of ridiculous. So first, let's talk about alchemy skills. You're going to need Acquired Tolerance for that huge toxicity boost, Synergy again for the mutagen bonuses, and for the purpose of this build, I really like Heightened Tolerance. There are reasons Heightened Tolerance wasn't included in the Euphoria builds we already talked about, but here it works really well because our alchemy usage is very specific. For signs, I of course have Delusion for the speech checks, and then we fully invested in Ard and Yrden. All 8 skills slotted in. The most essential of those skills that you'll want to focus on as soon as possible are Shockwave, Ard Sweep, Magic Trap, and Supercharged Glyphs. All Ard and Yrden skills are essential for this build, but of course I have some in my mutagen bonus spots because those are freed up for blue skills. Now, I've also invested a bit in sword damage and adrenaline. This will give you some fun gameplay variety so you're not only spamming the Yrden combo, which I found extremely boring and one-dimensional by itself. Swordplay will also give you some adrenaline, which is essential for the Piercing Cold mutation insta-kills. This part of the setup is really simple. You'll just want to use Muscle Memory for the fast attack damage, Precise Blows for the crit chance, and Razor Focus for the free adrenaline point when combat begins. Finally, of course, you'll need to be running Griffin School techniques for the stamina and sign intensity boosts. Now, our armor enchantment is extremely important for this build. You're going to want to upgrade your armor from the rune rite with Entanglement. What this glyph word does is cast a free Yrden trap every single time the alternate version of Yrden connects with an enemy. One of the Yrden skills we're running is called Magic Trap. Instead of tapping your cast, you hold down and place a different form of Yrden that zaps enemies. And with Entanglement, every zap will place a free standard Yrden trap, which plays into the set bonus we'll be talking more about in a second. For your extra glyph slots on your boots, pants, and gloves, just stock up with Glyphs of Ard for obvious reasons. For your swords, because I like this build to be somewhat balanced between swords and signs, I like to run Preservation for the armor and sword buff. This enchantment makes the Grindstone and Armorer table buffs permanent, so your armor protection will be buffed by 20% permanently, and your sword damage will receive the same treatment. You only need this on one sword to apply to all of your equipment, and I really like fitting this in where it makes sense. For your other sword, just fill it up with Vela's runestones to bump up your sign intensity. Now, we invested a bit in alchemy for a very important reason, as this set needs a bit of help when it comes to stamina. This build gives us enough toxicity to have 2 decoctions active with room for potions. Your toxicity might vary a little bit compared to my build, just because I have all diagrams discovered for Acquired Tolerance, but if you've been exploring, you should have plenty. The number 1 decoction you need to have active at all times is Ancient Leshen. What it does is increase your stamina regeneration, aka what you use to cast signs, every time you cast a sign. It resets with every fight, but it works very quickly. After you've cast Yrden and Ard a few times, your stamina regen will improve dramatically, and you'll be able to start spamming that combo. You'll also want to be running Echidna decoction, and what this does is heal you every time you use stamina. This more or less makes healing potions in this build completely unnecessary, so you can focus on other potions. The priorities should be Tawny Owl, which gives you a flat increase to your stamina regen, and I am also very fond of Maribor Forest, which increases adrenaline gain and, equally important, gives you a free point upon consumption. Adrenaline is so fun and necessary in this build because it directly influences our mutation Piercing Cold. This is an Ard focus mutation that dramatically increases the damage of Ard while also giving it a freeze effect, and any enemies that are both frozen and knocked down will just die instantaneously. Now, adrenaline is so important because the more you have, the higher your chance of applying freeze, leading to a higher chance of you getting an insta-kill. It should be pointed out that freezing cold is excellent even without any adrenaline, as enemies that aren't frozen still take massive damage from the base mutation, which works very well with the 6-piece Forgotten Wolf bonus. But the insta-kills and freeze are what makes Piercing Cold so fun, and that's what I want to stress here. This build is really fun while also being really good. Your Yrden plus Ard combo is the star of the show, but by investing a bit in the combat tree, our swords are also quite strong, and this build doesn't become totally one-dimensional. When you start a fight, just place an alternate Yrden trap, that'll zap your opponents, and place regular traps, and then you're free to spam Ard to any enemies within Yrden while also sneaking in some sword damage to further build up that adrenaline, which can't be done with signs without a specific upgrade that isn't really worth it at all. Keep in mind those decoctions I mentioned are extremely important, but if you're looking for a fun build, I'd say this is right up there with Wolf and Griffin. Okay, finally we're on to Manticore, and this is the part of the video I was dreading, because at this point I've already covered similar builds with Euphoria 2.5 times, but Manticore just works so well with Euphoria that I need to do it again. Because this is strictly a near endgame build, you can't even get the Manticore set until Blood and Wine, I'm gonna run through this setup fairly quickly. It's very similar to the Cat Euphoria setup I put together earlier with a few key differences. The main one being that here we've invested in both fast and strong attacks. My combat skills are very straightforward. For fast attacks, we've upgraded muscle memory for the damage, as well as precise blows for the critical hits. And for strong attacks, we've taken both strength training and crushing blows for the same reasons. We're also using both Whirl and Rend, as each are essential for a Manticore setup that is trying to maximize damage while also having a reasonable amount of gameplay variety. You're also going to need Razor Focus for a free adrenaline point when entering combat, and Resolve to ensure you don't lose any adrenaline when you take a hit, which you otherwise would. Moving over to the general skill section, we're of course taking Cat School techniques for the huge critical hit and fast attack bonuses. If you're confused, I'll explain in a second, and also we're going to want Metabolic Control for this build. This just raises our toxicity, aka how many potions and decoctions you can drink, by 30 points, which is going to be extremely helpful in playing into our mutation. In the alchemy tree, the two most important skills you need are going to be Acquired Tolerance and Synergy. I'm also going to include the bonus mutation spots right here, because this is a near endgame build, but keep in mind that the last two alchemy skills are your lowest priority if you don't have those two final spots open yet. Synergy is more or less always essential in every build, as it dramatically increases the attack power you'll be getting from mutagens, and Acquired Tolerance is going to give you a huge toxicity upgrade. Just how dramatic of an upgrade it will be depends on how much you've been exploring and discovering alchemy recipes, but if you've been clearing out most question marks, then there isn't a better skill investment you can make. Also required for this build is Fast Metabolism. This is going to make your potion toxicity drop rapidly. If you're confused about the difference between potion toxicity and decoction toxicity, go to the timestamp on your screen as I explain that in detail during the Cat Euphoria section. For the final two skills in your bonus spots, I really like Killing Spree and Hunter Instinct. Killing Spree just dramatically increases your crit chance for every enemy you kill. It resets every fight, but the increase is 30% per kill, so you can quickly be getting guaranteed crits as our chance is already solid. Hunter Instinct increases your crit damage by 100% when your adrenaline meter is full, which won't be a tall task with this build. For our equipment, again, very straightforward. From the rune right, you'll want Severance on each of your swords, which dramatically increases the range of Whirl and Rend. By the way, you do not need to be using the full set with this build. The 6-piece Manticore bonus is completely unnecessary, so be sure to use Erendite once you get your hands on it. Your steel sword can be whatever you like, but keep in mind that the Manticore steel is already excellent. Anyway, you'll also need to enchant your armor with Levity. I've talked about Levity many times already. This glyph word turns your medium Manticore armor into light armor. That means faster stamina regen, and equally important, the ability to benefit from the Cat School Techniques perk. For the extra glyph openings on your boots, pants, and gloves, I personally just prefer to use a few Quen glyphs. Our sign intensity with this build is actually really solid because of the mutation we'll be using, but we're mostly focused on sword damage, so I mostly stick to Quen. Extra intensity means it'll tank a bit of extra damage, and there really isn't a home run glyph option here. Our mutation is of course Euphoria. Despite it being nerfed a bit with the next-gen update, it's still undeniably one of the strongest mutations in the game, as what it does is increase your sword damage and sign intensity depending on how high your toxicity is. This build allows for very high toxicity, which translates to extremely high damage. With this exact build, your toxicity may still vary a bit from mine because of the acquired tolerance perk. If you're missing some alchemy formulas, it'll be a bit lower than what I have going on. I can drink 4 decoctions and still have room for potions. Fast metabolism rapidly gets rid of the potion toxicity for me, which means every few seconds I can pop another if I need to. My decoctions of choice are Troll for constant health regen, Catachan for a flat increase to my crit chance, Echidna for health regen whenever using stamina, and Ekamara decoction so any damage I deal to enemies heals me. I talk a little more in depth about each of these decoctions in the cat section, but the most important thing that needs to be said is that Troll is absolutely essential. The constant health regen from that decoction cancels out any damage you'd otherwise take from high toxicity. That means we can max out our toxicity bar with no negative consequences, as the higher our current toxicity, the higher our damage from Euphoria. The others I've chosen are more personal preference, but focusing in on healing and crit damage means we don't have to worry about healing potions, and can fully focus on the ones that increase our other stats. For me, I love Thunderbolt for the extra attack power, meaning higher damage, and Maribor Forest for the free adrenaline point and increased adrenaline gain. You'll also want to be running Tawny Owl for faster stamina regen. You can have so many potions active with this build at once that you can more or less drink whatever you want, whenever you want. Occasionally, you may have to wait 2 seconds for fast metabolism to do its thing, but really you're free to pop potions to your heart's desire. When it comes to sword damage, this build is just great at absolutely everything. Rend is going to one-shot just about anything when charged up, your critical hits are going to be outputting some ridiculous numbers, Whirl will take care of any groups, and all around there's just no going wrong here. You're going to be constantly regenerating health without even needing to think about it, and the Manticore set offers very solid protection to begin with. Well, that does it for today's video. If it helped, I'd definitely appreciate it if you could leave a like, and if you're new around here, feel free to subscribe. By the way, the What Would Geralt Do Witcher 3 video is almost here. It should be in your sub box within the next 6 weeks or so. I know some of you have been waiting a very long time. Thanks again to HelloFresh for sponsoring this upload, and I should say, there really is quite a ridiculously good deal they're offering through me, so check that out if interested. That's all for today, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.